Kim Bailey, and this is Floral Review. Today, this week, we're looking at a basic modern design. So because it's a defined design style, it doesn't have an interpretive title for us to work with. So it's just about having the best design that meets the criteria for a basic modern design. And the confusion often can be that a modern design doesn't mean today's designs. That's a contemporary design. A modern design is, in the definitions, is the transition time between traditional designs that we look at and think of in terms of the pedestal designs, the ones that are full of flowers, that have the roses and gladioli and very English country garden style flowers in them, that are very structured in their presentation, so they have a definite geometric shape, a triangle, a crescent, an inverted crescent, those sorts of ideas. Modern designs came about in the late 60s, early 70s, and it was about more minimalist. So the basic modern was about a very clean looking container, very few parts of plant material being used, and very definite lines in the design. So the basic modern is just the basics of that, and then there are other defined design styles in the modern genre that utilise different parts of plants or look at plant material in a different way. It was the first time that we really could use dried material as well as fresh material in designs. And so what I've done with this design is I have this wonderful container that was bequeathed to me. It's Japanese, as you can probably tell. It's a double container. It's a very textured ceramic on the outside, and it's a good colour because it has a little bit of brown in it, but it's sort of got the green tinge as well. So it's a great one to use as the basis for this kind of design. Because one of the things with modern designs, and the basic modern particularly, is the container is very important to the rest of the design. And I know it is with lots of our designs, but in this instance, the judges are looking for how well the container works within that basic modern framework as well. And so what I've got here, very simply, because a basic modern should all come from the same point of emergence in your container. So I've got two pieces of dried material. There's a dried strelitzia leaf inside of the palm spade. So the palm spade is the bit that's curled around, and the dried strelitzia leaf is curled and inside, well, the placement is inside that. The containers, to cover the mechanics in the containers, and I use the Kenzans, so the pin holders, with some water. I've got dried pistachio shells, because we eat a bit of pistachios through this household, and so we've got access to them. Some koala grass, just a couple of stems of that, and a banksia, a fresh banksia placed in it. So simple, straight lines, clear definition of the design style. The space allowed, I said, as it says there, was 70 centimetres, and it was judged from the front. Now, this design did not place, and to all intents and purposes it was disqualified, because the judge felt that the curled piece of strelitzia leaf joined the second part of the container, and I can see now that I look at the image that that's the case, and I should have lifted it up higher so it was well and truly clear of that second part of the container, because that then becomes two containers being used rather than the single container for the design. I accept that, and I understand that I should have, I know myself, I should have lifted it up higher, but I would have liked a little bit more feedback on the rest of the interpretation of the design. So I'll be interested to see now what, in terms of the principles and elements of design, knowing that this is a basic modern design, how well I have met that criteria, despite the fact that it does look like it's in two containers. Leave that to one side. Let's have a look at the analysis, and then I can talk a little bit more about it as I go through. Just going over the definition again. So a basic modern design emphasises clarity of line, simplicity of plant material, and a strong relationship between the container, the structure, and space. Materials are used sparingly and deliberately. The design should appear contemporary, controlled, and intentional, often highlighting form, line, and negative space rather than mass. So it's one of those times where you don't have to have a lot of plant material to use in a design, and they can be quite striking designs, even though they've got only one or two things in them. Balance, first of all. The design achieves asymmetrical balance effectively. The vertical plant material on the left provides height and visual weight, while the sculptural dried material on the right creates counterbalance through form rather than volume. The double container reinforces this equilibrium by visually separating the two areas of the composition. Strong example of contemporary asymmetrical balance. So the balance is right, and see, even from the image, it's looking like it's two containers. So I definitely need that lift of the plant material. The other thing I could have done, now that I look at it, is that I could have turned the container around so that it was one container was behind the other, so that it would give the design depth in terms of you look through, but I would not be giving that visual inference of the dried material touching the other container. It would also still mean that the design was asymmetrically balanced if you were looking at it front on just in the one container. So that's another thing that I could think about. Dominance. The tall vertical foliage is the dominant element. Its height, texture, and natural movement draw the viewer's eye upward and establish primary visual pathways. Secondary dominance comes from the curved sculptural dried material, which introduces a contrasting focal interest. And that can be a little bit of a point detractor in terms of a competition, because you really only want, because it's such a simple lined design, you really only want one area of dominance. And to me, I'd have to be very careful in thinking about it, about the weight, the visual weight that this palm spade particularly is creating. And perhaps what I could have done if I'd had it so that the containers were one behind the other and that the design was in the front container, that the palm spade wrapped around the base of the design, that again might make it too heavy in that area and stop you from looking up to the rest of the foliage. So once again, something to play around with. It might mean that the palm spade came out altogether and I only used the strelitzia leaf, and that would then give the movement effect, and give it some rhythm, give it a little bit of a different shape, but it would still be drawing your eye upwards to using that foliage as the dominant focal element. Contrast. Several contrasts strengthen the design. Vertical versus curved movement, fine foliage texture versus the solid banksia form, natural plant growth versus shaped sculptural material, and green foliage versus warm neutral dried tones. These contrasts are effective and align well. And I think what works particularly is that the container reflects those colours and those contrasts, because there's texture in that base that is not overtly uneven in its surface, but it reflects the textural contrasts that are already there in the design. Rhythm. Rhythm is achieved through graduated spacing of the foliage sprays, which was just handy because that's how it comes in the stem. The viewer's eye moves upward along the stem in a gentle progression. The curved dried material introduces a counter rhythm, looping the eye back toward the centre of the design. The rhythm is subtle but cohesive. And that's probably true, and I think that rhythm and movement is probably the one thing that I need to think about a little bit more carefully in this design. It's interesting with that foliage comment that because we're using a single stem and keeping the plant material to a minimum, we need to really think about what is that single stem adding to the design. Is it going to be the focal area? Is it going to be dominant? Is it going to provide us with movement? What can I use instead of this one that I think I should use, that would give me some better interpretation of the definition for this design. So it's always about not just what's on hand or what you think might look good, but it's about matching up this bit of plant material with the principles and elements of design for this design. Proportion and scale. The scale relationship between container and plant material works well. The height of the foliage feels appropriate to the container size, and the double vessel supports the spatial separation between the elements. The sculptural piece sits comfortably within the overall dimensions and does not overpower the composition. So that's one of the things that I mentioned earlier, is that palm spade has the potential to overpower the rest of the design. So I need to think carefully. If I was changing the angle of the way the judges were looking at it, I need to think carefully about that part of the design, not overpowering it and perhaps just using the strelitzia leaf because it's got so much more movement and it does curl around and keep you in the design but move you through the design. And the scale of that is as good as the palm spade itself. Line. Line is the strongest element in this design, as it should be for a basic modern design. Dominant vertical line from the foliage, curved structural line from the dried sculptural form, supporting diagonal connection between both sections. And that's the area where it shouldn't have been there. The interaction of vertical and sweeping curves gives the design its modern character. So even in that comment is that I do not need that diagonal, what appears to be visual connection between the two sections. So that's very much a warning sign for me that that was an element that I should have looked at more closely. Looking at form now, distinct forms are present: vertical organic form of the foliage, cylindrical Banksia form, and the curved sculptural dried form. These forms are clear and uncluttered, which suits the basic modern aesthetic of simplicity and definition. So what I've got there in the form are different forms, but they're not competing with one another. And so the cylindrical form and the curving of the dried material works together, and the vertical form is not. So if you imagine had I used a flax leaf or something that was, or a strelitzia leaf, something that was very clearly a vertical form but very definite in its parameters, in its boundaries, it wouldn't look anywhere near as good because it would be dominant both in terms of the line itself and the form. And this way the forms, because that foliage is a little bit more organic and has a little bit of the hint of a curve to it, it works well with the other forms that are there. Space. Space is used thoughtfully. Negative space between the two sections allows each element to be read clearly. The open areas around the curved material enhance its sculptural quality. This controlled use of space is very appropriate for the design style. Now, as I talked about earlier, I could have had the container placed so that one part was behind the other. Space then would be an issue in terms of this design because it wouldn't get the width of the design in terms of that base, providing you with extra space that becomes part of the design. So the space element is something that I would need to look at if I turn the design around. And once again, my head is saying take the spade out and you'll still have space, negative space around the dried strelitzia leaf, and it will combine with the space that is between the foliage areas would become more part of the design than it is now. That might work. Texture. Texture contrast is effective. Fine airy foliage, dense cylindrical Banksia, smooth sculptural dried material, matte ceramic container. These layers create interest without overcrowding the design. So it's interesting that this design is from my texture is dominant period, and it's not the most dominant part of the design. And that's important too, because with the basic modern we want simplicity, we want clean lines, we don't want to be made to think about the textural contrasts in a design. There's enough there, but it's subtle, as it was with the movement and the rhythm of the design. So it's bringing all of those elements together into one cohesive unit that is simple and basic, and it has that impact because of those things. Colour now, the colour palette is restrained and harmonious, natural greens, warm browns, neutral, ceramic tones. Excuse me, I did have a break and have some morning tea before I continue with the video. This limited palette supports the calm contemporary mood typical of modern floral art. So as I was just saying, we want something that is, those clean lines. It has impact because it's not bombarding you with all sorts of different colours or textures or ways to interpret the design. It is just a clear, solid statement, basic statement of here is some plant material. It's in and of itself beautiful. Take what you will from the design itself. So if we look at the overall evaluation, this design successfully interprets the basic modern style through restrained plant material, clear line structure, effective negative space, sculptural integration of dried material, and strong asymmetrical balance. The composition feels thoughtful and contemporary with a clear relationship between container, plant material, and structure. And as I said right at the beginning, that is the premise of basic modern designs, is that there has to be that relationship between the container, the plant material, and what you've done with the plant material. So I'm glad that overall the evaluation was right. I can see some issues in it, probably not enough for me to feel that it needed to be not judged on this occasion, but we go with what the judging is, and the judge decided she was going to be very strict because it is a defined design style. That's her judging method, and I have to abide by that, as we always do when we're in competitions. So let's just see what the suggestions are for improving the design. The Banksia, number one, the Banksia could be positioned slightly lower to strengthen the transition between the container and the foliage line. I think what I need to do with the Banksia is, and see, to my mind it needs to be taller, the Banksia, but then it would it would be disproportionate to the size of the container itself because it's so close to the same sort of form, the same shape. I think I need it to bring it a little bit more to the centre, or to have the foliage definitely behind it in that same visual line behind it, where it's a little bit offset at the moment. So that I would look at that first before I moved anything more obvious in the placement of the Banksia. Number two, a slightly stronger directional relationship between the curved element and the foliage line could enhance visual unity. Now this is where I could have changed it so that I was using just the one container and taken away the palm spathe because it's going to be too heavy if it's closer to the foliage, and just use the strelitzia leaf, which if you enlarge the photo you can see inside of the palm spathe, and have that spiral or curled around it. It has a natural curl. Have it naturally curled around the foliage, and that would do this. That would give me that directional relationship between that curved element and the foliage line, and give me that visual unity in that one container, all going towards the sky, but still some interest into and movement and rhythm in terms of the actual placements themselves. I'm waving my hand around in front of my face because I'm pointing to the image that I can see on the screen. Number three, one small additional echo of the curve movement in the foliage placement might strengthen rhythm. So I think what would actually strengthen rhythm, rather than, because what it's suggesting there is that I had another bit of foliage that came out towards the dried material, and I think that's going to detract from the clean lines of the design and make it a little bit too busy. So what I would rather do is, first of all, try the placement, taking away the palm spathe and moving the strelitzia leaf to behind and around the foliage upright that's there. These are refinements rather than corrections, as the design is already well resolved. It is, but it could definitely be better, as we have found out on our way through this analysis. So there we have our analysis for this week on the basic modern design style. Go back and have a look at that definition. It is a universal definition. Each country has a slightly varied definition of the basic modern design, but if you're in a competition where you are required to do a basic modern, look at or find out what rules are going to be used for the judging. If they're general rules, you can use this interpretation. If they're very specific to a particular association, look those definitions up and make sure that you follow those definitions. It won't vary very much from this, but there might be some specifics in it that give you a help with getting it right, getting the design right on the night, I was going to say. If you would like your designs analysed in this way, and sometimes you might want to have it done before you put one in for a competition, it would certainly help you to refine your design and have it as good as it possibly could be, because even if you didn't go with the suggestions that come from DesignEye, it gives you time to think and rethink the design once you've got it in place. So I encourage you to make use of that facility. Just go to the website and follow the instructions there. And I will see you next week for another design analysis. I'm Kim Bailey, and this is Floral Art Review.